Welcome to episode 315 of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. I am your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this week we'll be talking about the Game Awards 2024, Xbox making big Game Pass moves, Suicide Squad ending development, and much more. Before we get started, subscribe to the Baunfire Gaming Podcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes. Subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you are interested in supporting the podcast and all of my other content, check out the links in the show description. Let's get into the gaming news. Let's hit it with our main story. The Game Awards 2024. I'm not going to cover every single thing that happened. I'm going to kind of give my thoughts on the show, point out some specific things that happened during it, and then talk about some of the games and some of the awards. So my overall reaction is it was fine as it was going, and with some of the specific games that got accolades that they did and revealed, because of who I think the majority of the more vocal people are who follow Jeff and the Game Awards and all that. I kind of knew this game was going to suddenly, or this Game Awards was going to be like the best one ever, according to everyone. I would say it was the most like consistent one. I think it had the same problem that all of his shows have, where it has like a cool opening, the middle is just a bunch of drudge, and then the end, like you think it's going to be really cool, and then it's like, okay. And I guess it just depends on what you want to get from what Jeff does with all of his shows, not just this one. But it's, are you expecting like for it to be good, does it have to have these giant big announcements every single time? Like with this one, the lead up was all of this like, there's a couple of announcements. Jason Schreier was the most quoted of being like, there's two announcements I think are going to really surprise people. And there wasn't one that surprised me. Like, even the one at the end, the Naughty Dog's new game, which we'll talk about, was just like, well, okay. I'm surprised that PlayStation put it here. They've had such mediocre shows on their own. You would think they would hold that for themselves, but maybe they don't really care. But I didn't think there was anything. There were definitely surprises. Of course there were. That's the whole point. But there wasn't anything that was like, I can't believe this. So I don't know. I still think my beef is just that the show, it's too long, and it's long on purpose. And every time you bring this up, you'll get people do the whole like, well, it's expensive and Jeff has to pay for it. So he has to do a bunch of ads and stuff so that he can do it. But then if you look at the show and the things that are cool and the things that don't matter, the things that don't matter account for like 90% of the cost easily of this show. Not to mention how much, he's making off of ticket sales and everything else associated with it. Like one thing I pointed out during I streamed the whole thing. And one thing I pointed out is that they had, the envelopes for the game of the year this year. It wasn't just a card inside an envelope like every other award, even like really big ones like the Oscars and Emmys and all that. It wasn't just, a card with the winner on it. It was this you unfold it and it had literally, God, I think it was the statue you get, the trophy. It was a 3D pop-up. When they opened it, the trophy would pop up out of it. And like, that had to cost so much money. Like, it's stuff like that. I mean, like, obviously the stage is going to be elaborate and really nice looking, and it looked amazing. The aesthetics of this show this year were great. They were extremely good. No hate on that at all. It ran pretty smooth. It moved pretty quickly. I can't think of very many times. There were definitely a couple where things seemed to kind of linger longer than they should have. But, I felt like that was better this year, which is great. But but I just like Snoop Dogg's performance was neat. That was cool, you know? And he also came out and presented an award. But then, like, if you look at how much he got paid to be at the Olympics, you can do a little bit of rough math and guess how much he got paid to be there. And then you look at like Harrison Ford. Harrison Ford is not showing up to a gaming award show for free. Maybe he is contractually obligated. A lot of times when stars do movies or shows or games, maybe they tend to have these contractual obligations for marketing. So, they have to do so many appearances, and they may not even get to pick what those appearances are. I have a really hard time believing that Harrison Ford doesn't get to pick his appearances. And maybe he liked this. I don't know. Maybe because he got to be there, Troy Baker or whatever. I don't know. But like, there's all of these little things that add up, and you start to be like, maybe the show could be 2 hours long and still have a lot of the glitz and glamour, but maybe it doesn't have all the fluff, especially the fluff that probably costs the most. And I guess that's just still my beef. And a lot of people push back, and it's a spectacle and all that. Okay, I guess I still think like when he puts out the viewer numbers and stuff like that, I think that stuff is completely exaggerated. I mean, maybe, and I don't want to be one of those like, shows to proof thing, but like, kind of. Every year he, boasts about, oh, there are like 20 million views and stuff like that. Like, I find that kind of hard to believe, but I'm probably just being a hater there. I think it's still too long. I still think it's got too much fluff in it, and I don't think it's necessary. And a big part of that is that I don't even think that the entire reason for the length of the show and the number of ads is just to pay for these extravagant things that happen during the show, whether it's, bands playing or people or famous people making appearances or whatever. It's also, Jeff probably makes a lot of money off of these shows. And, he this isn't a non-profit venture for him. And I just, I think that's a factor, and no one wants to call out someone's pay and all that. And, obviously my opinion isn't the average. A lot of people pay attention to it. I watched it and I don't even really like the shows that much. So, maybe it's kind of a pointless thing to complain about, but like, I just think it could be better. And I don't think it's not going to get better because he doesn't know how or what to do. He obviously knows, which I'll talk about in a minute. He knows what people don't like about it, and then he still doubles down on those things. So I don't know. And I think what I get frustrated is, like I watch Kind of Funny a lot, and some of the, like they did a whole show about, how to make the Game Awards better, and a lot of the response to it was basically like, make your own show. And it's like that's such like an asinine response, in my opinion. Like, not everyone has the resources to do that. And so, I know the idea is like, well, don't bite the hand that feeds, right? Don't bite the hand that does have the resources. And it's like, no, like, just because I'm not a Nepo baby like Jeff Keighley is, doesn't mean that, I shouldn't be able to criticize. Like, it's just such a personal response. Like, I appreciate that a lot of these people, maybe they like Jeff, maybe their personal interactions, they've come to like him. They think he's a good guy or whatever. I have an opinion that I think it's more about they're afraid to lose the access that he provides, and that, whether they like him or not, maybe doesn't matter. And that I think that they're scared to not be in his good graces because there may be consequences to not being on Jeff's good side. That's probably too conspiratorial, and I can appreciate that. And especially as someone who's on the outside looking in for the most part, I just, it's a weird, the way the show and he get defended, and the way that people in like the games media, especially more notable people, really glaze him so hard. Seems like it's more than just like an appreciation for him doing this thing. That, I mean, it's cool, but I still like, it's still just like, in my opinion, just so dry and so corporate. And, like this year he was a little more willing he spoke a little bit about issues in the industry, and then let other people, specifically, which we'll talk about, speak pretty at length on it. And he did things like giving the winners, the few he allowed on stage, which it seems like most of the awards are given during a like transition screen. But the ones who got on it seems like they weren't as rushed as they were last year. Sven from Larian specifically, I think, kind of threw some shade about that, and we'll talk about that. But I just think there should be a higher standard for this show, and I don't think the response from people who do have Jeff's ear, who are notable in the industry, I kind of wish that their response wasn't, well, just do your own show. I think that's not very constructive. I don't think that helps anything. Oh well. But some of the cool things I did think that happened, or some of the notable things, was Amir Satvat was a game developer who I believe lost their job, and then I believe they're working again in the industry, but made like a whole website with resources and job listings and everything. This job resource website, and like his whole presentation, it came up after Jeff kind of very briefly mentioned how many layoffs there's been in the last few years, especially. It was this really beautiful thing. It was really, really cool. He seems just like a really cool guy. Just seems really good. It's definitely one of those situations where I'm like, oh my God, he just got spotlighted. Please, nothing weird. Please, like, I've been hurt by people in this industry so much. Just please don't be a weirdo secretly. But I'm sure he's fine. And the resource he provides, it just looks like it's amazing. It's, there was a extremely short amount of time where early in my like the Division game coverage, I was like, oh man, it'd be really cool to be like a community developer or be one of the community facing people at a game studio. So I applied for quite a few jobs, and things move forward with a few of them. It turned into a thing where I realized like I would have to like move my family like out of state for sure, and out of country potentially. And I don't think my family would appreciate not being around their family. So, I kind of gave up on that dream. Not that I probably would have never been hired anyways, but in the years since, I've definitely had a lot of feelings of like, oh God, thank goodness I didn't get a job, because this seems like a nightmare. It just, with the way that things work, it's not dissimilar to the fact that I tried to be for about 4 years after college, I tried to get a police job. And I learned a lot going through that whole thing, which isn't really for this podcast, but needless to say, I'm glad I didn't succeed in that either. So yeah, this Amir Satvat's thing was super cool, and definitely if you're a game dev looking for work, look up his name and see if his website can help you. They had, I forget what their names were, the two old men that sit up in the balcony in some of the Sesame Street stuff, I think. The two old men who were like heckling Jeff all night. It was funny, obviously, like hearing him get heckled, and like everything they joked about was like the length of the show, how boring it was, all the ads. But at the end, there was a funny moment that I, to my heart, hope wasn't scripted, but I assume it was, where they were talking, and Jeff was just kind of sitting there staring at him. They're like, oh, look at this guy. He's just standing there doing nothing. And it was like, it felt harsh, but the whole thing, I have three feelings about it. One, it was funny. It was a good bit for the show. I enjoyed it. Two, it was obviously scripted and approved by Jeff. So like there's this weird feeling about it, and that's why I said before, where it's like he knows what people don't like about these shows, and he improves some of the stuff. And this year probably was the most improvement I've seen from one show to another. I'll give him that. But like it also kind of reminds you like, oh, he knows what people don't like about this, and he does it anyways. And then three, it like takes everything away from it, just knowing that this like control freak for sure. Like it's almost like when like Mark Zuckerberg or something does a something where he kind of makes a joke about himself, where it's like, we know you're trying to lighten the mood by like making fun of yourself, but it's passive aggressive for sure. Like by those guys heckling him, those lines were approved by him because he wants everyone to know that, like, I know you guys don't like that stuff and I just don't care. At least that's my interpretation of it. Maybe it's not as menacing as I thought, but we talked about it a few times in how during the stream, and I was just like, these jokes are funny because they're true, most of them, but like the self-deprecating thing, one, it's only funny so much, it got old eventually. And it's just like, especially when it's, again, like, there's no chance it was not approved by him. So like, it's just like an acknowledgement. I don't know. I didn't think it was, I thought it was interesting. I'll say that. There was some really interesting, like, overhyping of announcements. There was, towards the end of the show, there was one where I thought he was going to like cry. And then it showed, and that's where I was like, oh crap, this is like Half-Life 3. Like, this is one of those huge announcements everyone was talking about. And then it was like, I think it was like Okami, the sequel, which is like, I know people love that game. I remember when I worked at GameStop, I sold that game all the time. Or GameCube, I think. It was a big deal. It was probably PlayStation 2. And I just like, it was just like, I remember after it was over, I was kind of like, okay. And not to mention, like, we found out, later that game isn't even development yet. I don't even know if it's in pre-production yet. It's a brand new studio that's making it. And so it's one of those things where it's like, okay, I guess, like, that's cool. But like, I don't know if it was quite worth that build up, but maybe for him it was. I don't know. And it was funny. So for the Game of the Year announcement, it was Sven from Larian, who's been pretty vocal in general, not at the Game Awards and at it. And last year, it was pretty notable that Baldur's Gate 3 won Game of the Year, and he got like 20 seconds to speak before they cut the show off and it was over. And I remember when it happened, him having a look on his face of like he was trying to thank his team, and like he couldn't, like they just ended the show. And I can't remember if Jeff like cut him off or whatever, or however it worked out. It was definitely awkward, and I remember that very specifically. And that was better this year, for sure. People got to talk. It was great. Joseph Ferris talked plenty, and I loved every second of it. But like, what was interesting about Sven's whole talk is he talked a lot about, how, at least for them, they try to make games where players aren't just something to monetize, and it's not just about hitting deadlines. It's about making something that you're passionate about and all that. And I thought it was definitely a dig at, especially when he talked about, allowing, he said something along the lines of, I'm getting, I'm owed time from last year, so I'm going to talk more to that tonight. And he was right. It was really cool. And I just, I thought it was interesting. So we'll talk about it more, but Game of the Year was Astrobot. And there was something, and this is probably just my take and a few other people's, but there was something, because this came from chat, I think it was Stung or someone, said like, man, it feels gross having Sven, who's so like anti-corporate, like the worst parts of the game industry, handing the Game of the Year award that his team won last year on one of the most passion-built games I've ever played, and handing it to a team who made Astrobot, which is undoubtedly a great game. Every single person I've seen who played it loves it. So I have no doubt in my mind it deserves the award. But it is, without a doubt, an advertisement for Sony and for PlayStation, and a nostalgia bait game. And now it's, that all that stuff is plastered on top of an insanely good platformer. So full credit to that. But like, it just, something felt wrong about it. It just felt so antithetical to his whole thing. But I'm sure, he's a game dev, they're game devs. I'm sure he has tons of respect for him. He knows that, all of that stuff is beyond them. So that stuff doesn't really matter, but it's just something I noticed and people in my chat noticed. And then a big thing I haven't seen anyone talk about, because everyone's in the glow of the Game Awards now, was that it was just the getting away from gameplay again. I guess maybe Summer Game Fest and the PlayStation and Xbox showcases are kind of, where the gameplay lies. But this really got back to what people complained about years ago, was showing us games like Okami that aren't even in development yet, or showing us games that have no release date because it's probably 26 or beyond, or showing us games that have 2026 release dates, which will almost certainly get pushed back. That was interesting. That and even in games that are coming out sooner, there was very little, if any, gameplay. I want to say like the Elden Ring standalone spin-off game had gameplay in it. There were a handful of games that had it, but it wasn't very many, and it definitely wasn't like the big ones. The Borderlands 4 and Witcher 4 and the new Naughty Dog game, which we'll talk about here in a moment. I thought it was interesting, and I think the lack of reaction to that has been interesting. In that, like, I thought for sure people would be all over him about it, but again, I think the loudest part of the gaming kind of commentary folks, things happened last night that they're really happy about, which is great. That's cool. I'm not down in that, and I just don't think we're seeing quite as much criticism as we maybe would have if things worked out differently with who won and so on. Getting into some specific games I wanted to chat about real quickly. Witcher 4 got showed. It was one of the first things, if not the first thing, I believe, that got shown. It was a complete cinematic. It revealed that, oh my gosh, of course I'm forgetting her name, Circe. You guys can roast me in the YouTube comments for getting that wrong. It's one of the characters from the previous Witcher games, and especially 3, is now going to be the protagonist. This is obviously a switch from a male to a female protagonist. It is at least someone that is known in the franchise and had ties already. The usual suspects don't like it. You aren't going to please everyone, and you're definitely not going to please the people whose livelihoods are based on getting upset about this stuff. I think what was one of the funny things I saw was people being like, "Oh, they made her so ugly compared to the last games." And it's like the character in this cinematic trailer was a babe, like was traditionally super hot. Like I just don't understand. It's so frustrating to pay attention to these doofuses. What was interesting, it was one of, I think, 2 different games that the disclaimer at the bottom was that was rendered in unannounced NVIDIA hardware. So it was definitely the first time we've seen game footage or seen footage of something rendered with likely a 5090, which is supposed to be announced in about a month. At CES, I think, is the big conference coming up for kind of game hardware or just PC hardware in general. So that was cool. The Elden Ring Night Rain got announced. This is a standalone Elden Ring game. It is not a sequel. I believe it's a co-op kind of slightly different take on Elden Ring. It's kind of assumed, at least from the chatter I've seen, is that it's not going to be as big of an experience and stuff like that. It's much more likely going to be something smaller. And I just I assumed, I was like, man, this is like probably DLC that they decided to make standalone. And after touching base with some game devs, they don't think so. I guess a project like this is really commonly going to be something that you will put like a junior producer on or something as the director, because it's not going to be as high stakes. It's going to be a smaller project. And this is how you get kind of like up and coming people in your studio chances for higher levels of leadership on games, while the other folks, in the studio are working on whatever the next big thing is. And everyone hopes that it's Bloodborne 2. So we'll see. Outer Worlds 2 got shown. I guess it was in-game stuff. I don't know if it was gameplay necessarily or not. Some of it probably was. And it looked great. It's not mind-blowing. I think anyone who expected it to be like the craziest looking thing that they've ever seen, I don't think Obsidian's going for that, and I don't think they ever have, and I doubt they ever will. It was a very funny trailer. It seemed to really kind of reintegrate us back into the world that the Outer Worlds takes place in. they even said it themselves. It's, better graphics, more guns, more stuff going on. All this. What was interesting is it said, and now in this time we've put in all the things that were missing from the last game. And one thing it didn't say was romance. There was no romance in the last game, and notably, there's no romance in their other game that's coming out, Avowed, either. And it seems like that just may be systems that they just don't want to bother with, and I kind of don't blame them, because from what I've seen, it seems like a lot of people never even engage in those systems or don't take them seriously. And so I kind of understand why you would leave that alone. Even the first Outer Worlds had no romance, except Parvati, who is my absolute favorite character in that game. You could help her have a romance with someone, which I thought was really, it was really, really adorable. It was very cute. Yeah, Outer Worlds 2, super excited about that. Like, genuinely can't wait for that game. I love the first one so much. And I never played the DLC, which I need to. But yeah, that's just it's just a world and a Obsidian, man. I really think that Obsidian is kind of like is like Xbox's Insomniac in a lot of ways. I won't try to pretend like they make maybe the same level of games necessarily, but Obsidian, they're so productive, and they just they make, and everything they make is at least decent. Even their little Pentiment game they made, that was like a small project. It was a side-scrolling mystery dialogue game, and people still loved it. So good for them. The Long Dark 2 got announced. It had like a different name, Blackthorn or something. But that's really cool if you're a Mass Effect fan. It's notable that the two main protagonists in the game, in this kind of ongoing like episodic series, are voiced by Mark Meer and Jennifer Hale as a married couple, or maybe recently divorced. I can't really, admittedly, I don't remember the story exactly anymore. So that's cool. I haven't played that in many years at this point, but I would love to continue that story after I learn what it was again. Probably my biggest surprise of the show personally was Turok Origins. I have very vivid memories of being like in elementary school and staying the weekend or the night at my grandpa's. And a lot of times when we would do that, he would take me to the video store in my little country town I grew up in, and they had Nintendo 64s that you could rent. And so we would rent a Nintendo 64. I'd grab a couple games to have for the night, and Turok was one I very vividly remember getting multiple times. Doing the whole thing where as far as I could make it that night was as far as I ever got to play that game, and I played multiple games, so I only ever got an hour or two into every game I played. But I specifically remember Turok, and it's just nostalgic for me. So the game itself, like what they showed, looked fine. It didn't look like amazing or anything, but it's, I'll try it out if it's especially if it's on that old Game Pass. Then we saw, let's see here, Dispatch, which was kind of like a Telltale style game, with Aaron Paul from Breaking Bad and other things. That was interesting. It looked, you're like a person who was a superhero in a suit your dad made, but then that suit got destroyed by a villain, and now you're like a paper pusher in like the superhero organization, and you're trying to get back to your former status. And it's all like dialogue choices and all that stuff. It looked like it had really, the voice cast for it is insane. It looked like it had really fun writing and like quippy answers and choices you can make. Yeah, I'm pretty pumped about that. And then they wrapped up the show with PlayStation's Naughty Dog Studio announcing their new IP, which is really exciting, called Intergalactic. It was interesting. It was a cool trailer. The vibe was cool. The visuals were amazing. I believe this was another game that they said was rendered on next gen NVIDIA tech. And I swear it said it was on Unreal Engine 5, which I don't think that Naughty Dog has used proprietary engines in the past, but please correct me if I'm wrong on any of that in the YouTube comments. It was a cool trailer. The design of the individual of who we assume is going to be the protagonist was really cool. I saw that the model she was based on, and she's gorgeous, really cool looking character. The design of the ship was really interesting. It has kind of like a early 90s vibe to it, with like a CD changer and kind of that. If you remember seeing some of the stuff from Oh, of course I'm gonna forget a Swedish studio. It had kind of that like hi-fi rush aesthetic a little bit of like, or at least like that style, like that time period, I guess. Obviously a more realistic style. Um, it was super cool. Intergalactic looked really interesting. It seems like it's going to be kind of like a type of game where you're, going to worlds and doing bounties and stuff like that as this individual. It was weird because it had such good style and the music was so good and the dialogue was interesting and fun, and like engaging. And but then it was like hard to not notice, like, every 2 seconds there was some kind of product placement. The ship was a Porsche. She was drinking a Pepsi, I think. Uh, she was wearing Adidas shoes. It was weird. It was strange. It was like too much. And maybe that's going to be part of the game. Maybe they're going to do this thing where it's this like dystopian hyper corporate world where a bunch of the corporations we currently know about are still around and everything's, around that, and that you're trying to make money to get the new cool thing or whatever. Maybe that's gonna be part of the game. I hope. I saw people defending it being like, whoa, like it just means it's well funded. Look, I'm sorry, but PlayStation is the last gaming publisher who should need help with financing their games. Maybe they do need help with it. When we've seen some of the old numbers of their profit margins and stuff like that, maybe they do need some help there, but I kind of doubt it. This seems like it's probably part of the aesthetic, and that's fine. Because I saw people being like, oh, Death Stranding had Monster in it. No one complained about that. That is a absolute false statement. Everyone complained, not everyone, a lot of people complained about the really weird and awkward product placement of Monster being in Death Stranding. Now, it was a temporary deal. I remember at some point after it came out, or it may have been the director's cut or one of the other, it got removed and just there's like a generic energy drink now. But yeah, people definitely said stuff about that. And so it's so funny watching people who are probably more Sony fans being like, well, you guys didn't complain, like making up this thing that people didn't do, which they definitely did. And then trying to use that to think people are dumb for complaining about this product placement. It's fine. It's the choice that Neil Druckmann made with this trailer. Again, if it's part of the game, then, in hindsight, it's gonna be like, oh yeah, that's why they did that, because this game is about that stuff. If it's not, then it's just gonna be another thing where people are gonna be like, yeah, Neil Druckmann's kind of weird. Like, and that's fine. Really, the thing that took me the most out of the trailer at the very, very end was the protagonist like lands on a planet and meets up with this enemy, and it was just the most like boring, generic looking robot I've ever seen. Like, it was like, oh, generic enemy robot in video game number 7, like from Unreal Engine assets. Like, I don't know. I think the trailer would have been better if they wouldn't have even shown that. But at the end of the day, if you see the reaction to that trailer, my opinion does not matter because people freaking loved it. And it was very, very cool. When it came to the actual awards, Astrobot won Game of the Year again. I don't get it, but I didn't play it. And so, everyone who has loved it, and it makes sense. The speech was really strange, because they were saying, that I assume the game director was saying like, we really want to give our thanks to the people who like started the platformer genre and perfected it and are who we're always chasing, or I'm paraphrasing, and I can't say their name. He was talking about Nintendo, like Mario and stuff like that. And I'm like, and all I can think about, and this is probably my Xbox brain being annoying, but like, what, who can, like, just say Nintendo, just think Nintendo. Like, it's such a weird, like, is Sony or PlayStation, are they that fragile that they can't handle one of their studios thanking another publisher and another platform for literally being like part of the reason that the entire industry is as big as it is these days? Like, come on. Like, and maybe he was just being careful. Maybe there wasn't anyone telling him you can or can't say that. But just the fact that he didn't feel comfortable, just, that sucks, man. And maybe it's not PlayStation's fault. Maybe there's a person right above him, or someone he's interacted with where he was afraid to, rock the boat or whatever. But man, like, how much of a bummer is that to not be able to just thank, the people who founded the thing that you just won an award for. But that's probably me being picky. I was super pumped about Hellblade getting 2 awards. They got best performance and what game with a purpose or whatever. So good for them. I think that Hellblade, a game that was extremely good, especially in the second half, which I don't believe a lot of reviewers even played, if you want my big conspiracy opinion. A game that literally the worst thing about it is that it was 10 hours and not 40, I guess. It's so frustrating. And even on a podcast I was watching in the days before, someone mentioning that, oh yeah, I only played, my Xbox 6 hours this year and it was Hellblade. And I was like, then you didn't finish it. Like, and they are definitely a person who I do not think finished that game. And they were definitely a person who reviewed it. I really like, it's frustrating for a game to literally set the new standard for graphics and gaming. The performance award is huge, and was it Melina Jurgen or whatever her name is amazing, who plays Senua. So good, especially not just in her vocal performance, but the face capture they do on her. She does all of the body, like all the action as well. Her body capture they did in the game, like it's just so good. And I still am kind of bummed that game didn't get more accolades, but it's okay. And then Balatro got multiple awards. I was kind of hoping it would win Game of the Year just because it's a cool story. The guy who made it, he's a single developer, did not go to the awards. He didn't accept the award. He had someone else do it for him. Kind of can't blame him. If you could make millions of dollars off of this little indie game that you made by yourself and stay anonymous for the most part, that's probably a super good idea. It got multiple indie awards, which the awards are basically the same thing. So it's another one of those like weird things about the game awards that they really need to fix their categories because they just have so much like crossover and then like big open spots too. But whatever, really cool for them. So look, overall the game awards are fine. I think I'd settle in around like a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10 if I had to rate it. It's just, I think I'm just going to have the same problem with everything Jeff does. And maybe that's a me problem and not him. So take that for what it is. I will hit up some other stories before we're done here. Xbox is adding a big backlog of games to the Microsoft Store, likely preparing for ABK, Activision Blizzard King games, being added to Games Pass. This has been going on for a while. It's a ton of backlog games, old Call of Duties and other games that currently you'd have to pay for to play them. But it's being assumed that, since the acquisition finalized last year, they're finally probably about to start adding that ABK backlog to Game Pass, which is really exciting. There's actually a bunch of, like, after Modern Warfare 3 up until the more recent, like the reboot of Modern Warfare, I didn't play any of those Call of Duties. So I'm like kind of curious to jump in and play like the one that like takes place in space and stuff. Like I never played any of those, and I've heard that the campaigns are awesome. So I'm actually excited for that Game Pass to happen and do that. We found out this week that Christopher Barrett, former director at Bungie, is suing Sony and Bungie for $45 million. The allegation is that they fired him under kind of weird circumstances. The implication was that he was doing things that were inappropriate, if I remember correctly. And he is alleging that they fired him to avoid paying him a $45 million bonus or some kind of payout that he was due. And so we'll see how that plays out. Going up against two giant corporations is an interesting move. So we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Monolith Software, who makes the Xenoblade games, is now 100% owned by Nintendo. This is one of those things where it's like a lot of people probably already assumed they were owned by Nintendo because they are so focused on that platform. So that just seems like it's kind of a natural situation to happen. This is one I found really interesting, that Xbox insiders are testing the ability now to stream their Xbox games back to Xbox One and One X and One S, I assume, hardware, which, if I read it all correctly, means that you'll be able to play like Xbox Series X and S exclusive games that did not release cross-platform or cross-generation, so back on the old system. So you'd be able to play Starfield on your Xbox One. via the cloud. It's obviously not going to be perfect. It's going to be pretty low resolution. It's not going to be perfect in all the ways that cloud gaming isn't perfect, but it's going to turn every single one of those however many million Xbox Ones into next gen consoles for streaming. And this is something I wish they would have done way earlier, because, at least in my brain, the whole strategy with this cloud thing is to get people to buy hardware, either a PC or an Xbox. Because like I've been playing actually the Indiana Jones game via cloud. I just didn't feel like downloading it. So through my PC, I've been playing it on the cloud. And it's okay. Actually, the response is extremely good. It feels great playing it. The visuals, I'm playing it on a 28-inch 4K screen. It's like 720p. It might be 1080. I don't think it is. It's like 720, but I do think it's 60 FPS. At least it feels like it. I could be wrong. But what I would say is that, like, if I was someone who that was the only way, I was like, hey, I got this trial for 1 month of Game Pass Ultimate. I don't have an Xbox and my PC can't play games, but I can play cloud, so I'll try that. I feel like I would see all those games and I'd be able to instantly boot them up and play them through the cloud. And I would get into it and I'd be like, oh man, this is pretty cool. How can I play this at a better quality? And that's when the case for the Series S, the Series X, or a PC comes into play. And I think that would be a bigger seller of those of that hardware than people think. But that's just me. I think that the whole thing with cloud, at least for now, is really meant to be a stepping stone to hardware. And I think it's a really good idea. But we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Ubisoft's Michel, I assume, Ancel, said that Beyond Good and Evil 2's development was hindered by competing visions. So apparently there was like people in the studio who wanted to reboot the game entirely fairly recently, and people who wanted it to be more of a space game, and all these different ideas. Supposedly this game's still in development. When I went to E3 in 2018, this game had supposedly been in development for years. In 2018. That was 6 years ago. Most games go through pre-production and full production and come out in 6 years. And right now we're in a situation where this game was, in theory, already in pre-production and had already entered full production, at least in some capacity, and is still, lingering. So we'll see whatever happens with that. Sony confirmed their interest and intention to purchase Kodokawa, who owns From Software, as well as a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of other media stuff. This seems like it's inevitable, at least in my opinion. I'll be curious if it's a Bungie-like situation where they're still going to allow at least their existing games to remain multi-platform. I feel like Xbox's openness to multi-platform has made that stuff a little more, palatable to Sony. Like, they're obviously not going to make like The Last of Us multi-platform, but they may be willing to let these like newly acquired games still stay everywhere, especially with Bungie, especially with From Software. But we'll have to wait and see. I think that's very much going to depend on how things go for Sony in the short and long-term futures. Publishers are currently withholding, there's been a bunch of reports of this, that publishers are withholding release dates for many 2025 and 26 games to see when Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to release. All of the chatter right now is that basically no one believes Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming in 2025. It would be a pattern, part of a pattern. Red Dead Redemption 2 got delayed fairly late in development. And I believe many of the games before that did too. It's also worth considering that in the time span between when Grand Theft Auto 5 came out and when Grand Theft Auto 6 could theoretically come out, it was something like 6 or 7 Rockstar games came out in that same window before Grand Theft Auto 5. So, Grand Theft Auto games, Red Dead 1, Red Dead 2 came after, I think. But, things have changed in game development, very obviously. And this is a really, really, really good proof of it. And then finally, Cyberpunk 2077 released patch 2.2 for the game that added, it seems like this was basically like a fan service patch. They even did a big stream for it, which was kind of weird because all it really did was just added like some cars and color schemes and things like that. A lot of like aesthetic, cosmetic stuff, which for the people who are still no life in that game is super cool. Like literally, no joke. I've made it pretty public. I don't really care about CDPR or Cyberpunk. I have my feelings on it. Regardless of those, this is really cool. I think it's really cool for people at this point to get that. Now, my snarkiest joke about it was I saw people being like, it's amazing that 4 years after launch, they're still putting out updates like this. And, you know, you could reference all the other games that have done the same thing and done it better, in my opinion. But maybe my snarkiest opinion on that is that, well, they only finished the game in 2023. So them releasing more patches in 2024 shouldn't be that surprising. So there's my badumts moment, and I'll move on from the snark. For content updates as we wrap this show up, the end of the year, so streams and podcasts will be kind of sporadic, especially streams. I'll technically have more time to do that stuff, but you know, family plans and stuff like that matter as well. But I'm also super busy with work and trying to wrap things up for the year, which is always a fun time for me. So, you know, be patient with me. I should be able to keep doing the podcast on schedule, but the streams, which I haven't been doing much of lately, going to be a little bit tougher. I had the Twitch year in review popped up recently. If for some reason I showed up on yours, feel free to tag me on social media for that. I would love to share it. I did average like a stream a week this year, which I did not expect at all. I thought I'd be way below that, but you know, I get busy and I get not so busy, so that kind of makes sense. I also had the podcast in reviews for I think those were last week. For this podcast, the Baunfire, as well as my Mass Effect podcast, the Mass Effect Hypecast, and those are both cool. Like, you know, none of my content is like hyper popular, really, but for me, it's more of a personal thing, and especially with my YouTube channel, but really with things in general. Even this podcast has grown a little bit lately, which has made me really happy. It's just nice to see that somebody cares. And so if you're still listening to this, I really appreciate you being here and giving me your time. It's especially as a father, a full-time worker, you know, someone who has the life I have. I realize that time is probably our most valuable resource, and I have a ton of respect for people who give at least a little bit of that to me, of their time and their attention, both things that, again, I know are extremely valuable. So that's where we're going to wrap this one up. So if you have your own topics, questions, or feedback, please be sure to let me know in my Discord, in the YouTube comments, or you can hit me up on social media at Bondiesel or at the Baunfire. That is all I have for this episode of the Baunfire Gaming Podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time.